future meetings, this is an opportunity. One of you have an inspirational quote or something to put us in the right frame of mind to meet. This is your opportunity to volunteer to give a 1 to 2 minute talk about it. So the free thought of the day today is not a quote from a famous author or anything. It is the recognition that since the vaccines for COVID came out, 90,000 Americans have died from a disease that they could have been vaccinated for. And those are almost all unvaccinated people. And so, as we stand here at this unique moment in time with that fact behind us, we have to recognize that a lot of those losses occurred because people did not understand which sources of information are worth listening to. They didn't understand why the CDC is a more reliable source of information than somebody on Facebook or YouTube. They didn't understand why they should talk to their doctor instead of their friends. They didn't understand why there are economics involved with the information that your phone feeds to you. And it's based on how many ads you watch, not based on the truthfulness of the information presented. ASF has a role to play in this world, a big role, and I hope that we can rise to that challenge. Next up, we have our speaker for today, and it was decided earlier that Ann Orsi could do a better job introducing her than me. And so you know what? We adapt on the fly. So now I present to you Ann Orsi.
Thanks, Chris. I've known Mara for decades and have been really fascinated by the work that she's done. She was one of the founders of the Arkansas Times, and I'm a huge fan still of the Arkansas Times. She has won just about every and possibly every writing award, journalism award that the state of Arkansas has to offer. She's done amazing investigative journalism. Her work on the West Memphis 3 case is if you ever watch the documentary, the 3 movies on HBO about the West Memphis 3, Mara's got a starring role. She's also written, 2 books about it. She has written about other issues that, in journalistic writings, other issues that are of pretty significant importance, and she's done a lot of investigative work. One of the cases that she worked on, even before the West Memphis 3, I think, was the mysterious deaths of the 2 boys on the train tracks in Benton. And her book, The Boys on the Tracks, was pretty gripping, and things are still going on, I think, until maybe last year when the mother of one of the boys died. There was a lawsuit still pending. Of course, there are lawsuits still pending over the West Memphis 3. When I saw that she had written a book about what happened at Mena back in the 70s, I was all in. I'm really excited to hear what she has to say today. If you want to buy a copy of any of her books, they are here for purchase, and she'll sign them. And Mara, I'm going to turn it over to you. Welcome back. This is the second time you've spoken to the Freethinkers, so welcome back. Glad to have you.
Thank you, Anne. Will it be all right if I stand down here? That's good enough? Okay, all right. Well, it is a pleasure to be with you today. I have great regard for the Freethinkers and the role that this organization plays in our state. I appreciate the fact that you do contribute an important element to the culture of our state, right down to the display for the winter solstice that you put on at the Capitol every year. Very, very nice to go down there and be able to see that. So thank you, and thank you, Anne. When my book about Mena came out, which was just in August, Anne was the first person to contact me and say, please come and talk. And I appreciated that a lot. I've had good opportunities to speak about it since then. And I can see through the book sales that it is spreading around. I like to think of the image of little brush fires. So this is part of that. The beauty of speaking with you all is that we have this amazing and very torturous moment in our country right now, where so much thought, so much actual data and information is being ignored or questioned or challenged or just denounced in dangerous ways. And that goes from all of the embrace of the big lie to the efforts to limit the belief that something called critical race theory is being taught in schools, in elementary schools, for heaven's sakes. So there's these very big issues that we have got going on in our country. As a journalist, my first love was the First Amendment. We have that. It's the First Amendment. It is right there shining in our Constitution. And the importance of that we can get information out, and it can be received, and it can be discussed, and we can then make informed choices from it is so fundamental. That's it for me. And so that was the foundation of and always has been of my approach to journalism. Now, I'm not in Washington, and I'm not tackling that level of our debate. But it all does filter down to us. It's all here on the ground for us and in every other community in the country. And so I have focused my career on Arkansas. And as time went on, more and more particularly at the criminal justice system in Arkansas, because justice is so much a part of everything else that we do. If we don't have that, well, the game is up. So I've really tried to focus on that. And as it's happened then, as I've gotten older, what do you know? I find that I have been writing not just current events, a little bit of that, but really more and more history of what's going on in our state. And I've realized as time goes on, it's history that has not been welcome. History, real information that a lot of people, a lot of the culture of this state wants to suppress, wants not to be out there. And in one way or another, and it's those kinds of questions have intrigued me. And so that's where I've kind of tried to burrow in. On the other hand, it's history that I think a lot of people really do want to know what happened there, as you were saying, and what did happen at Mena. We know bits and pieces. So what's the real thing there? And so that's where I've ended up finding myself. It's been very interesting to me, and I've been gratified that it's been interesting enough to other people that I've been able to sell some books. So along the way, it's now that I've gotten several of them under my belt, looking back and looking at a broader picture, what I see or actually hear is the silence in them all. This span of silence of topics that are unwanted, the discussion, parts of them or all of them, there is some big squelching that goes on. And so that's kind of the theme of what I want to talk to you about today, is this silence. Both as it concerns our current history, but also current events, but also our whole history. Who are we if we've got these gaps, these darknesses in our past? With that, if you'll let me, I'll just kind of recap a little bit and tell you how I've kind of reached this perspective by looking at a little quick tour of my books. So, but before I start, I want you to bear in mind a number, because I'm going to come back to it. The number is $3,000. Okay, everybody, $3,000. All right. So this was the first book that Anne mentioned, The Boys on the Tracks. And what got me about that, and I'll just touch on, these are deep, complex. There's a lot of stuff goes on in these books, but I'll just touch on a little illustrative episodes for each. In this one, the two boys were run over by a train, and the train crew saw it, horrified, and then reported some anomalies. The blood, once the train had stopped and the EMTs got there and everything, said the EMTs noted that the blood did not seem fresh. These were men who hunted. They were used to seeing a fresh kill, and how blood is. They figured that they had just done a fresh kill, to their horror, but the blood didn't look like it was fresh. And so they reported that. But the bodies were sent off to be autopsied. The state medical examiner, the infamous Fahmy Malek at the time, said it was marijuana. Actually, they had smoked themselves into a marijuana stupor and lied down side by side on the tracks with the train barreling at them, the tracks shaking, and siren, I mean the horns going, everything that the crew in the cab could do, and nothing awake. They didn't move a muscle. But that was the official ruling. And that's where things started here. And I was working at the Arkansas Gazette at the time in the newsroom when that came over. And I thought that Malek was saying suicide by marijuana. I looked around the newsroom, and nobody else seemed to be particularly amazed by that. And that was sort of a first whiff of how, boy, these things can just get on. And unless you got that kind of, plus I had the experience of having smoked some. So I put it all together, and I had some critical thinking going on there, that ain't right. And it was years later, I began to investigate this and get much further into how that all came down. What happened was then that ruling had to be changed. It was ultimately, after subsequent autopsies, it was changed to murder when there was evidence of murder found on the boys before the train hit them. And then a grand jury was impaneled to be run by Dan Harmon, a figure who's ended up eventually going to prison himself for drugs. But and this was all believed to be related to drugs, but while it was going on, all these presumed drug dealers were being called in or told that they were going to be asked to come and testify about what they knew about the drug scene in that county. And bam, 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 6 more died. 6 more of the people who were supposed. So I mean, it's the boys on the tracks, yes. And it's the rest of them. It was a series of murders related to this. And I like to say, if this had happened in Chicago, at UCLA, at some other kind of environment where there were 2 investigation, and then everybody involved in the investigation dies, and then the prosecutor who's running the investigation gets set up for drug dealing himself, only in Arkansas would that just be, oh, well, 30 years have passed, and we have not solved one of those murders yet. 30 years, and we have not solved one of those murders, not at the county level, the state level, or federal level. So that's but it does speak to how these waters of silence. If Fahmy Malek had gotten the marijuana ruling by, that would have been it. That got challenged. That mother, Linda Ives, who died recently, she was fighting. She was being told she was crazy to keep at it. And she kept on fighting. But the ability to just silence these overbearing questions is astonishing to me. So then I became fascinated by the case in West Memphis, where three 8-year-old boys were murdered. This was in 1993, and a month passed after the murders with no arrests, and then the police end up arresting 3 teenagers, local teenagers, and charging them with what was quickly leaked to the media. Basically, it was a satanic crime. I knew at the time, and speaking of, the free thinking, critical thinking kind of way of looking at things, I had been talking to the FBI, some people here who were involved in the questioning of these whole satanic killings. There was sort of a lot of publicity about that at the time, and concern, was that really going on all over the country and so forth. And the FBI had actually, prior to these murders in West Memphis, done a big national thing of all of their people. Have you heard been hearing? They just hadn't been hearing anything about that. And so they were very skeptical to begin with. I was skeptical, but okay, 3 arrests. I'll wait until they see what comes up at the trials. I didn't attend the trials because it was too far away to get to. But I then, as soon as the trials were over, one teenager convicted, sentenced to death. 2 others, they asked for the death penalty for all 3. 2 others sentenced to life in prison. So that's when I went and I started going into and I couldn't imagine, what did the jury, what were they going on here? What was that evidence that they were looking at that would come up with a sentence of death to life? And I didn't see it. I read the transcript, the whole transcript of 2 trials, and I didn't see anything there. What I did see was that in that month between the murders and the trials, nothing was, the police were not getting anywhere. People were panicked, everything. There was a Bojangles restaurant. This was right on I-40, right outside of West Memphis, right in the middle of West Memphis. There's a Bojangles restaurant right there on the freeway. And on the night of the murders, the night the boys disappeared before their bodies were found, a staff person at the Bojangles called the West Memphis police and said, you might want to know, now I didn't know anything about any murders at this point. You might want to know that we have a man went into the women's restroom. He's muddy, he's bloody, and he's cleaning up in the women's restroom. Just a concerned citizen, letting the police know that. At the same time, the police are telling the parents, kids run away. So this had not come together again. Then the next day, they find the bodies in the water, dead, terrible. Nobody at the police apparently put the call from Bojangles, which is a matter of less than a half mile from, and right on, separated by woods where the bodies were found, right on the edge of that. So a couple days later, somebody from the Bojangles, the manager, I believe it was, calls the police again and said, hey, we called the other night and now you found these bodies, and that guy cleaned up in the, I should add that night they did send an officer to drive over to the restaurant with the muddy, bloody man in the restroom, but he had just left. The officer drove through the drive-through window, said, is he still in there? She says, no, he took off that way, and officer drove off, and that was the end of that. So they did respond that much, but so now a couple days go by, but there's no more contact. The restaurant calls again and said, he cleaned up, and we thought that was weird enough. There was blood on the walls in the restroom and everything. We saved the paper towels with the blood on them. He dropped a pair of sunglasses into the commode, and we've got that here for you, and so forth. Well, at that point, somebody does come over. They've got 2 murders now. All right, somebody does come over and collects that evidence that the staff at that place was smart enough to retain. Then I never hear any more about that. What happened to all that? I read through the transcripts now. These guys have been, these 3 other kids have been convicted and off to prison, 1 to death. And so what was the deal, whatever, with the Bojangles guy? But the deal with the Bojangles guy, the defense attorneys asked, so what about that Bojangles guy and the evidence for, and on the stand, the head of the police said that evidence was lost, end of story, lost. Boy, that's a big silence creeping in on a big bunch of evidence, crucial evidence right at that moment. And there's nothing more to be said. It's lost. It's lost. Let's go on with the trial. Let's convict these guys. And that's what happened. That whole Bojangles episode was lost, was lost, or something happened to it. But anyway, it was never available to become part of the history of this story. So instead, they got one of the youngest of the second youngest, who mentally slow boy, Jesse Miskelly. He made a very convoluted confession that they said, well, that cinches it. They got the other two who didn't ever confess. They were convicted and sent off. And they did bring the whole occult and the Satan and everything in as a motive, because they didn't have a murder weapon. They didn't have any other kind of motive. They didn't have eyewitnesses. They didn't have anything. And at one point, the judge kind of leaned over to the prosecutors and said, if you wanna introduce that, bring up that Satan stuff, I'll listen. Interesting thing, that part didn't even appear in the transcript. Talk about another silence. That from the judge didn't appear in the, but HBO, fortunately, who had managed to, a brilliant move, had gotten filmmakers, really good filmmakers, to come down and film these two very peculiar trials. That little bit of conversation up at the bench was on their audio tape. It happened. So we find about these things. We never heard about that judge saying, you want to introduce the, and we don't know anything about the Bojangles evidence, but the rest is history that we do know. Well, we also know that 18 years later, after they've been in prison for a long time, DNA evidence comes out and the boys are going to be able to get a new hearing. Supreme Court orders it. And just at that moment, then the state decides, well, you know, and the defense attorneys too, everybody was kind of, except one of the three defendants, Jason Baldwin, were ready to go. Okay, let's just cut to the chase, get them out on an Alford plea, which is a strange bit of business. I completely disagree with it, but it did. It got them out, and they've been out for 10 years now. Since then, 10 years go by, I ended up, okay, that was Devil's Knot. This one, then when they got out, I wrote this book about Jason Baldwin, 16 years old, sentenced to life in prison for these murders. And I just find him such a sterling guy, I just had to get to know him better. And so that's what, what that book is about. They offered him, the prosecutor said, we are going to be putting you on trial for your life. We're going to ask for the death penalty. Now, if you'll just say, Damien, the other one, that, you know, he's the ringleader, he did it. They didn't have that. If you'll just say that, we won't ask for the death penalty for you. 16 years old, and he said, no, I'm not taking that deal. That didn't happen. So there are these bright moments in it, and I have spent enough of my life looking at the dark moments. I really wanted to spend a little time talking about that kind of courage, which is pretty unusual. So, but now we are to the point where, what do you know? Maybe you've heard something about it. I've been surprised that there's not been as much more publicity. In the past, just this year, this business of lost evidence is cropping up again in this West Memphis case. A new prosecutor was appointed, and he's taken the job. He's talking to the Kiwanis up there in Northeast Arkansas, and somebody says, well, you know, welcome aboard. Now, what do you think about that old West Memphis case? He said, well, I think what I heard is some of that evidence has been lost. That was big news for everybody. That was really a shocker, because the attorneys for the case had there's a new form of DNA testing that they wanted to gather up and start going at it in order to completely exonerate these guys. But now this comes out and it's reported in the news. Democrat Gazette calls up and the mayor says, yeah, I heard it was a fire. It's a bunch of fire 15 years ago, something like that. It destroyed a bunch of evidence from that case. So I filed a Freedom of Information request with the fire department. That was the first. And, you know, what are your big fires over there in the past 20 years that have involved city property? None, there weren't any. And so they kept telling me that. The attorneys, meanwhile, have been digging, pushing. In April, one of the attorneys filed a Freedom of Information request with the police for everything they got on this. What is the status of everything? And when did it, if it was destroyed, when was it destroyed? Because if it was destroyed before that Alford plea, that changes the game entirely. That changes it totally. That would be the baddest face of the whole story. But we don't know, because the West Memphis police are not responding to those FOI requests. More silence. And that's where it stands at this moment. It's kind of a standoff. Just, Mom, that's one way of dealing with things. Just don't say anything. So I had every intention of moving on. In fact, I think this book says this is part 2 of a trilogy. I was going to write a 3rd book about the Albert plea and this whole thing back then. I'm glad I didn't now, because there's this whole new episode coming up. But I was planning on diving right into all of that when the library, Central Arkansas Library System, called me and said, "Did you write a book about Barry Seal over in Memphis, in Mena?" And so I knew Barry Seal, his history over there a little bit, as well as anybody I think around here, because I'd become interested in him. He was a major drug smuggler. He'd become a federal DEA informant after he got caught and got turned, and he becomes this big time, really important DEA informant. Then he gets assassinated under very, very bad, suspicious circumstances in Baton Rouge. I knew a little bit about all that, and it was very tantalizing, but I was going to write that 3rd book. But Cal's persisted, like I said, because Tom Cruise was coming out with a movie about Barry Seal. This was in 2015. And this was going to be the big hit, you know, little press, library press. We just don't get blockbusters very often, especially about Arkansas history. So this could actually make us some money. And so finally, I decided, okay, great, I'll do it. So off goes the 3rd book on the West Memphis thing, and on comes a year of diving into what happened with Barry Seal at Memphis, that whole saga, which I, as usual, found very fascinating. What I learned was that basically, and I had to have elaborate timelines on and spreadsheets and everything to keep it all straight. But basically, I was a reporter. I'm paying attention to stuff that's going on around here, by and large, especially kind of criminal justice stuff, especially big time criminal justice and big time major international drug smuggler, which is what the FBI had him pegged as long before he ever moved his airplanes to Mena. I was very interested in, what do we know about him? Well, how come he was dead in Baton Rouge before I ever heard the name Barry Seal? Why haven't we ever heard Barry Seal? He'd been operating, flying his planes out of the airport at Mena for 4 years by the time he was killed in Baton Rouge, gunned down by members of the Medellin cartel, at a place where he was ordered to appear. At a time, he was ordered to appear by a federal judge who knew that the Medellin had a $20 million contract on his life, and were in the courtroom when he gave that order, where to appear and what time to appear. Those were the suspicious circumstances that have caused a lot of people a lot of doubt about what happened to Barry Seal down there. He was, at that point, had turned on the Medellin. He was testifying up against drug smugglers. A lot of people think he was still smuggling on his own, kind of working both ends against the middle. But all this going on, and he's dead down there, and didn't hear about him. In fact, didn't hear about him when he died, made the newspaper in New Jersey, but it didn't make, we just didn't have any relationship to this guy, didn't know anything about him. Why not? I find out that at the time he died, he had already been a big celebrity witness at trials against drug lords that were reported well in the paper. Barry Seal said this on the stand and this on the stand in Miami. A really big federal trial in Las Vegas against other drug people, which was why the Medina were so anxious to get rid of him. And all of this was being reported. He had also reported at the President's Council on Organized Crime. And that was reported. In fact, that one was reported in the Arkansas Gazette. Big picture of Barry Seal. In fact, I got a picture of it in this book, that article. But with no mention of Barry Seal, who operates his planes out of Mena, Arkansas. We didn't know. He's a celebrity guy for the DEA and for the Justice Department. We still have no idea. We didn't know anything about Barry Seal for several more months. Now, he testifies before the President's Commission on Organized Crime. He's doing all this great work for the Justice Department, DEA, winning cases for him. Then he gets assassinated down in Baton Rouge. Still haven't heard a thing about him in Arkansas. And then he gets, and then there's this big international event, which is that a plane crashes in Nicaragua that then is linked to what we now know as the Iran-Contra affair. Big explosive historical event, big scandal in Washington. A few months after that, New York CBS figures out where'd that plane come from? Where it goes into the history of that plane. Well, what do you know? That plane had sat for more than a year at Mena, Arkansas. What the heck? What was that plane that opens the Iran-Contra scandal doing it that long at this airport in Mena, Arkansas? Excuse me. And so they look into it. What do you know? That plane was owned by, at that time, by now dead drug smuggler Barry Seal. This is when we here in Arkansas first hear about Barry Seal. All this has gone on. People around the country know about Barry Seal. This is when we first hear about it. This was a lot for me to begin to put together, and I gradually did. Then I got in touch with the two investigators in Arkansas who knew most about this story. And that was, there was a state police investigator in Mena who was assigned to investigate his drug smuggling. He was known, that the officials here, the minute he arrived, they knew that this is Barry Seal. He's moving his planes to Arkansas. He's a major international drug smuggler. And we think we're going to be getting him turned into an informant. They knew all this at the time. So the state police, and they want to say, and if he's still smuggling, we want to know about it over there. That's the state police guy job. Asa Hutchinson was the U.S. attorney in Fort Smith at the time for the Western District of Arkansas. Very astutely, he calls the IRS investigator and says, we're going to go at this from a money angle. If that guy, Barry Seal, is down there and he's bringing in some of that drug money, there's going to be money laundering, and we're coming at it from the money laundering. I want you to investigate that. And that agent, Bill Duncan, takes that on. After talking to bankers, talking to different people who worked at the place, Rich Mountain Aviation, a company there in Mena, that had made a deal to store and retrofit Barry Seal's planes for smuggling. Talked to some secretaries there who were willing to testify, talked to bankers, all of this gets the evidence. It's not earth-shaking. I mean, it's not quadrillions of dollars whatsoever, but it does defy US money laundering rules. He takes that evidence. He's got these people who, they're small town people. They know they're dealing with major crooks, and says, but we'll testify. We will appear. It takes some nerve to do that. We'll appear before the grand jury. We'll say what we know. And they agree. He takes that up to Asa Hutchinson, but Asa Hutchinson seems not so interested anymore in pursuing this line of questioning. And those people, the agent who had said, I've been working with him for many years on different investigations, and it was always these are the people, and it was always just what you would expect. Let's bring them in, let's hear what they have to say. There was a list of 20 witnesses he had ready to go. 4 of them were subpoenaed. 1 did not show up. 2 others came out and said, we don't know why we were called. We were basically asked our names and addresses and nothing else. So they were very perplexed about this. So I talked to these guys and I began to piece together this story about Mena. And what happened was that's not presented to the federal grand jury. A SEAL gets assassinated. Then the plane he had over there in Mena gets crashed in Nicaragua. Iran-Contra explodes. There are congressional investigations. They're looking at, well, what's going on? What does this have to do with any of the rest of this? And so at a very politically intense time there, that all cools down. And ultimately, the last big investigation of what went on was going to be conducted by the House Banking Committee. And it sent investigators to Arkansas, to Mena. How many of you heard about that big House Banking Committee investigation at Mena? No. When I'm talking silence, I'm talking silence. They came, big investigation, and for years, it was, the report is just about to be released, the report will be released, the report will be released. The report has yet to be, will never be released. It has not been released. It is still silence. And finally, I was able at the very end of this book to get in touch with the lead investigator who ended up writing the report. And he said, I always believed, I was always told that was a commitment that report would be released, but it has not been. Now, this is our history here. This is all Arkansas history. This is all where these things, these stories, we should know. We should be able to know this information. It should be available to us. It should we be able to talk about. We should be able to talk, not critical race theory in elementary school, but we should be able to talk about some of this stuff because it did happen and it is true. So that's basically what I got. I got a story about a book written in a year, in time for that Tom Cruise movie, which was basically what we were working for, to tell the real story. Whatever Hollywood did, and if you saw it, it was kind of goofy. But whatever Hollywood did, there was going to be a really solid book about what actually happened here. And a lot of it was silence. So about this, the state police, the IRS, and then this House Banking Committee in particular, and a few other investigations along the way, going nowhere about it. So my book was being edited, it was just about ready to go. The Cruise film was about to come out. Random House was excited enough that they contracted with CALS a $10,000 contract for the audio rights for the book. And they paid an initial $1,000 down on it. So that's all good. The cover was designed. It was advertised on Amazon for pre-order. And then the manuscript got sent upstairs somewhere in the library, where then I was told, well, the director of the library has deep concerns about the content. Now, I've been a reporter for a long time. I'm used to having my books fact-checked. I can be sued for libel. I understand how this works, and I'm very, very careful. But I also know that if I'm going to have a book, every one of my books and many of the articles I've written have had to go to lawyers, first of all, because I'm not dealing with dead Civil War generals. I'm not dealing with Marie Antoinette. I'm talking about people who are alive right now and could sue me or any publisher if they wanted to. So I'm ready to have everything I do fact-checked and vetted, is what that legal reading is called, before it's published. And they said, we can't afford to have this book vetted. I said, no, that's not how it works. The vetting is the publisher's responsibility. We have a contract. You do, that's your part. I spent a year on this just because our deal was I would get royalties when the book comes out, nothing else. So I'm working with nothing for a year, but that's your part to do that. Couldn't possibly, Little Rock Library could not possibly afford to have this book vetted. I believed at that moment that I was dealing with an untruth, that was not true whatsoever about I believe that the deep concerns about the content were about the content as it was originally expressed to me. And I faced a moment where I had to decide, I do have a contract here. Am I, Mara Leveritt, who has loved libraries so much all her life and been so grateful to libraries, am I going to sue the library to force a publisher to take a book that I've written? And I couldn't stomach the thought. It was just too horrible to me. So I was disgusted. I didn't really want to, if that was the way it was, I didn't want it under those terms. So anyway, so they drew up a thing. The Little Rock Library rescinds the agreement to publish this book about Mena. And, excuse me, and I signed it. And that was in 2016. And so I did that. The effect on me were several effects. Emotionally, it was devastating. I've never been in that kind of a situation before. I've had a very good career and proud of it. And this was something new. Financially, it was devastating. You don't really like to spend a year of your life on something that burns up like that. I had a sense of betrayal, not just of me, but I had talked to those investigators, a lot of people around Mena who were very wary, as in all my books. People are a little worried about talking, but they did. They put their trust in me, and I assured them, this book's coming out. That was a hard thing to face. Underlying all of that was the shock, a deep shock. My reverence for libraries was shaken. I don't know how any of us can even consider ourselves thinkers at all if we have not embraced libraries in our lives, and I surely have. So I never imagined that any library would reject a book of local history written by a respected author. Least of all, that it would be a book that the library itself had commissioned. So this was almost more than I could process. It took me for a long time. Along the way, I found out that there is something called the Library Bill of Rights. This was adopted by the American Library Association in 1939. Now I'll just quickly, because it's really important. We affirm that all libraries are forums for information and ideas. This is why I want to speak about this at your group, because this is what you're about. Information and ideas, and that the following basic policies should guide their services. 1, books and other library resources should be provided for the interest, information, and enlightenment of all people of the community. Materials should not be excluded because of the origin, background, or views of those contributing to their creation. 2, libraries should provide materials and information presenting all points of view on current and historical issues. Materials should not be prescribed or removed because of partisan or doctrinal disapproval. 3, libraries should challenge censorship in the fulfillment of their responsibility to provide information and enlightenment. Well, something else, something quite different from that was happening here. It took me a couple of years. I regrouped. I decided this is what happened here. This part of the story is part of the story. So I rewrote it all. I preface it as I wrote it as a memoir because now I'm going to get a little personal in it. I'm going to tell what happened in my unexpected part of it. And I published that, and that's what came out this last August. So I'm glad to say that since then, libraries have ordered it. The Benton Library asked me to a really wonderful event last month. I've been really glad to take everybody up on it and talking about it. The book is selling And that $3,000 I mentioned, you know, that asked y'all to remember, $3,000. When I was going to publish this, I decided I would publish it myself. And when I did that, I had to get it vetted. I had to get it fact checked. The total cost was less than $3,000 to do that. I was able to recoup that within the first 2 months of book sales. And that's without that $10,000 Random House audio contract. So that's why I say I was dealing with falseness there. I'm sure of it. And more important, a great silencing. Now Cal's has ordered 10 copies of this book. Well, that's wonderful. But so far, nobody in Little Rock is talking about, no one is raising this issue. And that's why I decided that since I was invited here today and you are who you are, I wanted to bring it up here. Thanks very much for having me.
Mara, please don't take your mic off. We want to open it up for some Q&A, and I've got some questions right off the bat.
Okay, well, where should I be?
Go ahead and stand back where you were. I'll take the mic and move to the side. And I would ask anyone who has questions, if you could come on up to the mic maybe, or if you just be aware that I'm going to be repeating your question so that we can definitely hear it. Go ahead and take your spot there. My first question has to do with the political aspect of this. I was living here when all this happened, when all of these cases happened that you talk about. And the suspicion that the boys on the tracks were related to what was happening at Mena. And then there's a situation that you didn't mention with Dan Lassiter and Roger Clinton that was also covered up and exploded in the late 80s. Is that addressed in your book at all? And did you find anything that tied those things together? You've got your mic. Yeah.
I did. And actually, the concerns about a relationship between the murders in Benton in Saline County and a possible connection to Mena, I had never been able to pin it down and have not yet. So it may not exist. But I did find that there were many interesting overlaps there. Many and even since the book has been out, people have contacted me with, did you know this? Did you know that? Our collective knowledge. Boy, I always think, boy, if we could just ever get out what everybody really knows around here, we know it. I just think of Arkansas as like an abused family where somebody's got their bluff in and everybody's just kind of going around being mum and pretending like, oh, aren't we the happiest family? No, it's not that. We've learned to play that keeping a quiet game, partly out of great fear. I mean, there's a lot of fear, has been in Saline County. One woman told me she was going to offer some information to the police about what she had heard about the boys on the tracks, because she had teenage kids, and from them had heard some information that she thought the police might want to know. She reported that to the police, and somebody told her, I wouldn't talk about that if I were you. You still have sons at home. And that was the level of intimidation that and I mean, not just will badmouth you. No, it goes way, way deep in that case. And there's a lot, and then there's also the financial aspects of you want to keep your job, don't you? And all of these things that play really heavily around here. So ultimately, to answer your question, Ann, I did find some intriguing connections that I write about in this book.
What about the connections with the political machine that was in place in Arkansas at the time? And I believe that the current director of the library was part of that machine, if only peripherally towards the end.
The current director of the library was he ran for a political office. Now, and I'll say, boy, everybody on all sides hates me. Democrats and Republicans got plenty of be mad at me about. I'm not a political. I got no access to grind except when I see this kind of thing happening, and I see it happening from both parties. And so, yes, the Nate Coulter, who's the director now, did run for political office. He was involved, slightly with all of the Clinton side of things. So was Bobby Roberts, the original director, or the previous director of the Butler Library.
His wife was press secretary for the Clinton, for Governor Clinton.
And I've had great respect for Bobby Roberts and what he's done. So, I mean, I'm not being simplistic about this. There are, but I do think we just call it the way we see it. I'm just saying, this is what happened. This is what happened. And these are the explanations. That $3,000 is what they told me. That was the explanation for why that book was not going to be published by this library. And so that I'm just, so at the same time, Asa Hutchinson did not let the information that IRS agent brought to him get to a federal grand jury. So take your pick, or pick both, or whatever you want to do. But I just think it's important. Let's have the information out here.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I'm just curious about what the name of the title of the Tom Cruise movie is and how accurate it was.
Oh, okay. The Tom Cruise movie was called.
Look it up on IMDb.
But I'll tell you, there was a much better movie done by HBO in 1996, and it is called Double Crossed. Really, I mean, just heads and shoulders, and it's available free. You can find that if you just Google that one. You can find that online for free, and it's way head and shoulders. Interesting thing about the Tom Cruise movie. American Made, stupid name, which is why I can't remember it. But and the reason all this started, because the original name was going to be Mena. That was the working title that they had, which was why I'm here talking about it today. But then they changed it to American Made, and they changed a whole bunch of other kinds of things in it as well. And it's just a lark to show off Tom Cruise's teeth.
Other questions?
Yes, I mean, you make pretty strong accusations about Nate Coulter. Is that really Nate Coulter? And essentially suppressing this. I mean, do you have any speculations or theory? I can't imagine why he would care one way or the other.
So the question for the recording is that whether Mara has any speculations about the current director of the library system, Nate Coulter, and what his motivation might be.
You know, I appreciate the question. And I've been asked that about the motivations of the West Memphis Police. I've been asked, I don't go into motivations. I don't even feel equipped, or, I know what I was told. I know what was said to me. And I know that $3,000 is ridiculous. I mean, that the amount of money, if the Arkansas Times could afford to have something I wrote vetted, which they did routinely, for the library could. And we had a serious contract, and they had anyway. So it is a serious thing, I'm saying, a very, very serious thing, but I don't go into the motivation part. That would be wrong. And also I feel like I like my readers so much, and my readers are smart. I have always enjoyed the interplay, the back and forth, that my readers can think. They are free thinkers. And so for me to be able to say, this is what happened. Now, what you got to do is you got to say, is she credible or not? And I stand on my credibility, but That's up to anybody else to decide. But that's the bottom line is I am saying what happened.
Yes.
What is an organization called that does vetting for books to be published?
There is, it's a lawyer. Basically, it just has to be a lawyer who knows something about libel law. So there are, let me tell you, this book, I was on a phone with a lawyer in California for almost 2 months. I thought, you should just fly me out there. But it was excruciating. And it was excruciating because she wanted to see every document, every little thing, that I could support. Because there's never been a law case. There's nothing has ever gone to court in this story. And yet I got all kinds of stuff about all kinds of people in this story. So she wanted to see every last thing that could support in case they were sued. It was really it was the hardest part about writing this job was going through that process with her. But we got through it and we did just fine. And the book has stood the test of time without a problem. This one, no problem. Simon & Schuster certainly had it vetted, as any responsible publisher does. But this had 2 trials, police records, lots of stuff. They're good with that. You know, if it was in trial, as that first lawyer told me, if it's been to court or they're dead, you're okay. Well, but and then this one was just pretty personal, with not a lot of the vetting on this one, and it was not just vetting, it was a fact check. And I got Matt Campbell, some of you may know, a local attorney. He also is a blogger. He's a smart lawyer. He writes a blog. He's broken some pretty big stories himself. I consider him a good journalist himself. He understands this stuff. On the side, though, when they came to me and said, we can't afford to have it vetted, I said, since we're going deeper into this, I was told at first, don't worry about it, Mara. We'll get somebody, one of the patrons of the library, an attorney, to vet it. Don't worry, we can just call in a favor. Well, then that wasn't going to happen. Okay, then I said, well, then what about Nate himself? Nate is a Harvard-trained lawyer. I bet he understands this kind of stuff. And he's the head of the library. Nate could do it. No, that wasn't going to happen either. So there were all kinds of ways that this was not going to be vetted by the library. And it wasn't, but when it came down to me who had not been paid for a year of work, reaching into my bank account, fact check, which is a job, looking over everything and basically like that first attorney did, what do you got? Can you support it? Is it there? We did it all. And that's what he charged me. So I think it was within the realm of possibility. Could have happened.
Anyone else? Mara, thank you so much for being here. I'm so delighted to see you again. And Mara, we'll have books out front in the entryway, or maybe even just back in the back of the room when our presentation is over. And please feel free to talk to her after that as well. For the moment, though, thank you very much.
I've got to say, I have not spoken about this all publicly before, and I appreciate this group's existence and that I am able to do it because you all are here. Thank you.
Thank you.